Go ahead.
So there was a deal for these 90 billion to Ukraine, but Hungary is participating, is contributing or
No,
not?
Hungary is totally out of that. I think it's a bad decision. All the others, except the Czechs and Slovaks, think that it was a good decision. I think it was an extremely bad decision, which bring Europe closer to the war.
Viktor Orbán has just done something that Europe's leadership never expected. He didn't whisper behind closed doors. He didn't soften his words. He looked straight into the camera and said the quiet part out loud. For years, Europe was told one simple story: a heroic leader in green, a clear enemy to the east, and a war that would end in victory if only enough money, weapons, and patience were poured into it. Orbán says that story is no longer reality. And worse, he says it never truly was. When the longest-serving leader in Europe openly questions the foundation of the Ukraine narrative, it doesn't create debate. It creates panic. Because this wasn't just criticism. It was a declaration that the emperor has no clothes. The reaction from Brussels tells you everything you need to know. No immediate rebuttal. No confident press conference. Just silence. A silence so loud, it exposed fear. Orbán didn't frame the war as a moral struggle anymore. He framed it as a failed calculation, a project sustained by denial, and paid for by European taxpayers who were never asked how much pain they were willing to endure. He laid out the numbers. Nearly $200 billion already committed, more promised, more borrowed, more delayed consequences. And then he said the words Europe refuses to hear. Ukraine cannot win this war militarily. Not with slogans, not with speeches, and not with money that Europe itself no longer has to spare. Orbán accused EU leadership of confusing symbolism with strategy, of choosing ideological stubbornness over economic survival. According to him, Europe is no longer fighting a war. It is financing its own decline. Factories are shutting down. Energy prices are crushing households. Industrial giants are leaving the continent. Germany, Europe's economic engine, is stalling. Volkswagen, a symbol of industrial dominance, has begun shutting production inside Germany itself. BASF is relocating major operations to China. France is drowning in political instability, protests, paralysis, and fractured leadership. This is not coincidence. This is context. And Orbán chose this moment carefully. He described Ukraine's leadership not as a strategic ally, but as a financial sinkhole, a system that absorbs money without producing stability. The loans, he said, are an illusion. They will never be repaid. They will become permanent debt carried by generations of Europeans who had no vote in the decision. Then came the line that froze the room. Europe, Orbán said, is tying itself to a corpse. This was not a personal insult. It was a diagnosis of a political project that refuses to accept failure. Orbán challenged the very logic of Brussels leadership, accusing it of betraying European sovereignty in exchange for moral posturing. He reminded everyone of a brutal financial reality. If a country cannot pay its own army, its own pensions, its own bureaucracy, then sovereignty exists only on paper. This is not ideology. This is accounting. While most NATO leaders have isolated Moscow completely, Orbán has kept channels open, not out of loyalty, but leverage. He has positioned Hungary as a bridge between Europe, between Russia, and between an America that may soon change course entirely. This is where the story gets uncomfortable. Orbán is not speaking in isolation. He is echoing a shift already underway across the Atlantic. Behind closed doors, Washington is recalculating costs versus benefits, endgames versus endless funding. Orbán has openly referenced partners across the ocean who, in his words, have already closed the book. That was not speculation. That was a signal. He has hinted that support for Ukraine's leadership is cracking, not just in Europe, but within Ukraine itself. That corruption still bleeds through aid pipelines. That taxpayers are funding a system they are never allowed to audit. While European workers protest, while industries collapse, Brussels continues writing checks. Orbán calls this the ultimate betrayal. He describes Ukraine's continuous demands not as diplomacy, but as pressure tactics, extortion wrapped in moral language. And notice what didn't happen after his statements. No unified condemnation, no coordinated outrage, because many leaders already know the truth. They're just afraid to say it. Orbán insists his words weren't meant to offend. They were meant to warn. He questioned whether Ukraine's leadership even has the authority to negotiate peace anymore, suggesting real decisions are already being made elsewhere, without Kyiv at the table. His message to Europe is brutal and simple: jump ship now, or sink together. He points to demographic collapse, infrastructure damage, an impossible debt burden that will haunt Ukraine for decades. This is not romantic geopolitics. This is hard power reality. The hero narrative is fading, and accountability is taking its place. Remember the explosive confrontation in Washington earlier this year? That wasn't accidental. It was the opening act. Deadlines were set. Terms were outlined. The message was clear: compromise or lose support. Europe followed. New loans were approved, but cracks widened. Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic opted out, refusing to chain themselves to frozen assets and permanent liability. Orbán's strategy is working. Winter is coming. Energy systems are under strain. Political patience is evaporating. And now, the illusion of unity is collapsing. Orbán has crossed the Rubicon. By saying what others won't, he has forced Europe to confront a question it avoided for years. If the strategy failed, who is responsible? If the hero became a liability, who pays the price? This isn't just the end of a narrative. It may be the end of an era. The post-Cold War consensus is breaking. A multipolar world is emerging, and survival is beginning to matter more than ideology. History is moving fast, and it will not wait for permission. The fuse has been lit. The only question now is this: will Europe adapt or collapse, trying to defend a story that no longer survives contact with reality?